live long and prosper. So in this video series, I'm going to be talking through the social justice elements of every episode of the original series of Star Trek. The thing that inspired this project was actually a Fox News article which argued that Star Trek has in some way betrayed its traditional commitment to sort of political neutrality or middle ground by embracing progressive politics. In this series, we're going to see that Star Trek has always embraced progressive politics, and it's always been aspirational for social justice in various senses. I am taking a broad perspective on social justice here, so that may include multiple different types of social justice, whether that's racial, whether that's economic, whether that's religious, whether that's abilities, gender and sexuality, anything broadly considered. I will go through every episode. Some of the episodes I will interview fellow Trekkies and talk with them about it. And then below, in the descriptions, I will give you additional information about the episodes, particularly their original air date, who wrote the screenplay, and who directed that episode. I also want to dedicate this series to my dad, Michael Allen Zapkin. He was an OG Trekkie from back in the day, and it was watching the original series with him that I came to love Star Trek. In this video, we're going to talk about Who Mourns for Adonais, the second episode of Season 2 of Star Trek. So, Who Mourns for Adonais? Basically, the Enterprise is just, humming along, doing random space stuff, cartographing and whatnot. When all of a sudden, out of nowhere, giant hand, boom, ship is trapped. They see on the viewer the face of a dude dressed in sort of golden ancient Greek style garments. Not technically correct ancient Greek garments, but minor issue. Crown of laurel leaves, etc., etc. And he's like, "Hey, everybody, I'm Apollo, the god. You're going to come down and worship me." And so Kirk, McCoy, Chekhov, Scotty, and Caroline, I forget what her last name is. It's not that important. Mostly she's just referred to as Caroline. Who for some reason they have an ancient civilizations specialist on the Enterprise, which doesn't really seem that crucial to me, but that's whatever it is. So they all beam down. Apollo's like, "Hey, I'm a god, ancient Greece, Agamemnon. Let's get you some goat skins to wear, and I'll put some goats in the fields. You all can tend them. You can worship me, etc., etc." And Kirk and the crew, for the most part, are like, "That doesn't sound like a good deal to us. We would rather pass." And Apollo's like, "Too bad, you're staying because I'm a god, and I get what I want. Hey, Caroline, you're pretty sexy. Let's put you in," again, not a historically accurate Greek outfit, but we'll put you in a fairly revealing version of an ancient Greek outfit. And then Apollo, will, make you the mother of a new race of gods and whatnot. Kirk, McCoy, Scotty, Chekhov, they're trying to figure out, all right, what can we do to get out of this pickle that we find ourselves in? And they realize the ship kind of helps because they're at some point able to sort of break through the communications barrier and the force field that Apollo is projecting to hold the ship in place. So everybody kind of figures out, okay, Apollo's got this temple. The temple helps him sort of recharge his magical batteries. If we can drain those batteries and destroy the temple, then Apollo is defeated and we can go our merry way. This is essentially what happens. It kind of depends on Kirk convincing Carolyn to reject Apollo, because he thrives on worship and adoration and stuff like this, etc., etc. She is convinced to do this, to do her duty to humanity and the ship, and so the Enterprise is able to blast the temple. Everybody wins except Apollo, who's like, why? Oh. And then he dissolves himself into the cosmos. And it's all very sad. Everybody is somewhat downhearted by this turn of events that they have literally precipitated. So that's what happens in Who Mourns for Adonais. There's some interesting elements in terms of social justice here. One of them is, of course, as always, the treatment of women. Pretty much any Star Trek episode that has women in it, despite the fact that it's supposed to be an egalitarian society. We have a complicated element here. On the one hand, we've got Uhura, who's working on the communications terminal, and Spock is like, hey, you're the best person for this job. You're super qualified. Do your best. So we've got that clear, so a person who's not only female, but is African-American, or actually Uhura is African. Nichelle Nichols is African-American, whatever. Uhura is, I want to say, from Kenya. So this person who's female and African-American is identified as the most competent person for this particular technical job. Very delicate, difficult work. So there's that element of it. But then we've got Caroline, who's like, oh, I'm in love with Apollo, and look at my sexy, faux, ancient Greek outfit. She's not really like that, but, she is like, I'm in love with Apollo. Let's just, be Apollo's little, goat herders and worshippers and shit. And it seems like she really thinks that might be a good plan. So her role in this is not super strong or super she's not a women's liberal. We'll put it that way. So that we got that element. Another big element obviously has to do with Apollo himself and this idea of the gods, and this idea that the gods are worthy of worship and adoration. Apollo clearly thinks this. There is an interesting line toward the end. After the temple is destroyed, Apollo says something to the effect of, or no, before the temple is destroyed, Apollo says something like, mankind has always needed the gods. And Kirk says, we find the one to be sufficient. Which is interesting, because in general, Star Trek, according to Gene Roddenberry, is supposed to be a kind of religious-less universe. There are a couple of episodes in which religion comes up, Bread and Circuses being probably the most overt one. But generally speaking, religion is not playing a big role here. And actually, there is a line earlier in this episode where McCoy says, Scotty has no use for gods. It's an interesting thing, whether or not religion here is presented in any sort of positive way whatsoever. But clearly, the Apollo demands that the entire crew of the Enterprise come down, worship him, live in the way that the ancient Greeks lived. And he gives them the only alternative he gives them is suffering and death. So we have here an interesting commentary on religion, I think. Because if your alternatives are worship, devotion, sacrifice of your way of life, or I blast you with a thunderbolt. Incidentally, I don't think Apollo used thunderbolts. I think he was a bow and arrows guy. It was Zeus who really used thunderbolts, and that was like his thing because he was the king of the gods in the Olympian pantheon. But Apollo uses quite a lot of lightning in this episode, which I don't think is true to the myths, but not that crucial necessarily. But this idea that, like, this is what religion is. We have that commentary here on the nature of religion, that it is either submission or suffering. And ethically, that's quite problematic, I think. But then the other element related to religion is Star Trek gestures toward the idea of ancient aliens. And many of you probably won't know this unless you've watched my video on Immanuel Velikovsky's Oedipus and Akhenaten. I have a huge problem with ancient aliens. I think it's an incredibly problematic thing, especially the TV show from the History Channel, because it normalizes conspiratorial thinking, it normalizes irrational, uncritical acceptance of nonsense. It normalizes the rejection of expert opinion on the basis of personal incredulity, etc., etc. And all of these things contribute to larger scopes of conspiratorial thinking. And there is a good amount of evidence out there that people who buy into one type of conspiracy theory, something like ancient aliens or ancient high civilizations, flat Earth, even young Earth creationism, that these things prime those people, those believers, to believe in other types of conspiracy theories. Pizzagate, the idea that the 2020 election was stolen and Donald Trump won, these kinds of things. Conspiratorial thinking primes people for more conspiratorial thinking, and often those conspiracies, it often starts with fairly innocuous seeming conspiracies. And actually, I wouldn't even put Ancient Aliens in the innocuous. Ancient Aliens seems innocuous, except for the fact that it's incredibly fucking racist. Because it's always, oh, brown people, black people, indigenous Americans, they wouldn't be able to build stuff. Aliens must have done it. But it's very rarely, oh, white European peoples, they were too fucking stupid and just waddling around in mud to build anything worthwhile. It's rarely that. It's generally speaking anti-global South. So there's that element of it. But conspiratorial thinking, my larger point, conspiratorial thinking primes people for more conspiratorial thinking. Anti-vaxxing, for instance, which in the COVID pandemic proved to be a major, major problem in the US. So this is a thing that I definitely have a problem with. And the crew, Kirk in particular, does sort of suggest maybe these aliens that we have now encountered, Apollo that we have now encountered, came to Earth in the distant past and set themselves up as gods. So it's not a full-fledged endorsement of Ancient Aliens theory, but it's definitely moving in that direction. And while I don't think Star Trek is sort of presenting this as like, oh, here's a serious thing to think about, I have a problem with what Ancient Aliens theory has become and the way that it has promoted conspiratorial thinking.